My name is Peter Nolan. I'm 36 years old now, married, quiet, and mostly unremarkable. But when I was younger, early 20s, desperate for money, convinced that sleep was optional, I worked jobs that put me in places most people never see at night. Places that feel abandoned even when they aren't. Places where silence has weight. This story isn't about ghosts. At least, I don't think it is. But it's about things that move when they shouldn't, and people who exist where no one should be living. I still think about that first night more than any other. Back then, I worked as a night security guard for a private contractor. The pay was mediocre. The hours were brutal, midnight to 8 in the morning. But it covered rent, and when you're young, you tell yourself that exhaustion is temporary. The warehouse they assigned me to sat outside the city, far enough that the hum of traffic never quite reached it. A massive concrete structure squatting alone in the dark. No windows along most of the walls, just long, featureless stretches of gray broken by loading bays and rusted metal doors. Inside, it was even bigger than it looked from the outside. The building was used as shared storage for several tech companies. Expensive equipment, prototypes, old servers, pallets stacked so high they disappeared into shadow. From the floor, you couldn't always see the ceiling. The lights overhead were industrial and harsh, but they didn't reach everywhere. There were pockets of darkness that never seems to fully disappear, no matter how long you stared into them. There were only 2 of us assigned each night. One guard patrolled the outside perimeter in a car. The other walked the interior on foot. Everyone wanted the car. That night, I didn't get it. It was a Wednesday. Quiet. The kind of night where you expect nothing to happen, which somehow makes everything worse. I'd clocked in at midnight sharp and started my initial patrol, walking the aisles before settling into the security office later. The layout reminded me of a grocery store. Long aisles, 10, maybe 15 of them. One main cross aisle cutting through the middle. Boxes everywhere. Crates, wrapped pallets, everything labeled in faded ink. The security office sat near the southwest corner. Inside it were 2 flickering monitors connected to an ancient camera system. Only 2 cameras in the entire building, one in the northeast corner, one in the southwest. That was it, which meant walking, constantly. I remember thinking as I walked how empty the place felt. Not abandoned, just hollow, like something had been scooped out of it and never replaced. About half an hour into my shift, I was moving down one of the outer aisles when something caught my eye. At the very far end, between stacked boxes, a shape, white. At first, I thought it was packaging material, foam, plastic wrap catching the light. But it didn't sit right. It was rounded, smooth, and it wasn't still. It looked like something peeking. I slowed my steps without meaning to, my heart to that strange, sinking pause before speeding up. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of perspective. But the longer I stared, the more convinced I became that it wasn't an object. It looked like the top of a head, just barely visible, poking out from behind a tower of boxes. I picked up my pace, not running yet, just faster, controlled. Halfway down the aisle, the white shape slipped out of view, pulled back, slow and deliberate, disappearing behind the boxes. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Objects don't do that. People do. I broke into a run, boots slapping against concrete, adrenaline flooding my chest. When I reached the end of the aisle, I scanned left and right, expecting, hoping to see the other guard. Maybe he'd park the car and come inside early. Maybe this was all some misunderstanding. But the corner was empty. I stood in the southwest corner of the warehouse, breathing hard. And that's when I noticed the camera above me. It was angled down the aisle I'd just run through. I followed its line of sight, and there it was again. Closer this time, 7 aisles over. No longer just a shape. It was a face, pale, unnaturally so, almost reflective under the warehouse lights. The features were sunken, stretched tight over bone like someone who hadn't slept or eaten in far too long. The eyes were open, wide. Too wide. They stared at me. Then, slowly, deliberately, the face slid back behind the boxes. I stood, frozen. That wasn't the other guard. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands and called him. My voice cracked when he answered. He told me he was still in the patrol car, parked near the far end of the lot, 5 minutes away. Those 5 minutes felt impossible. I knew what my job required. Approach, investigate, confront if necessary. But knowing and doing are two very different things when you're alone in a building that suddenly feels too quiet. I forced myself forward, step by step. I reached the aisle where I'd last seen the face and stopped at the end, peering down its length. Nothing. Empty. No movement. No sound. I told myself they must have bolted, broken in, seen me, panicked. It made sense, almost comforting. I walked halfway down the aisle, scanning between the stacks. Then I smelled it. Rot. A thick, putrid odor that clawed its way into my nose and settled in the back of my throat, like spoiled meat left out in the sun. I gagged, covering my mouth, but followed the smell as it grew stronger. It led me to a crate. A large wooden box, darker than the others, stained in places. The lid wasn't sealed. My hands trembled as I lifted it. Inside was a body, lying twisted in a pool of blackened blood. The smell hit me all at once. I retched, stumbling back, barely keeping my feet. My eyes locked onto the neck. There was no head. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned afterward. I remember fumbling with the radio, shouting for the other guard to call the police. I don't remember thinking, just running. I ran until my lungs screamed. I burst through the back exit and collapsed outside, vomiting onto the concrete. When I reached the patrol car, I couldn't speak. I just shook. The other guard was already on the phone with dispatch. Police lights filled the lot minutes later, red and blue slicing through the dark. They sealed off the warehouse. Forensics came. The body was taken away in an ambulance. But the part that stayed with me, the part that still keeps me awake, came later. When they reviewed the footage, the cameras had cut out 3 full hours of video. Gone. No malfunction, no explanation, just darkness. I told myself it was human, that the face I saw belonged to whoever did that they'd been holding the severed head, watching me from the shadows. I told myself that explanation was enough. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the nightmare had reached its peak, until years later, when I stepped into another abandoned building and realized that some places remember you, and some things don't like being disturbed. I told myself I'd left that warehouse behind. Life moved on the way it always does when you're trying to outrun something. New jobs, new friends, new distractions. But fear has a way of fermenting quietly. It doesn't rot. It waits. It hardens into something heavier. Years passed. I was in my late 20s the next time that familiar pressure settled into my chest again. It started as a joke. A rumor passed around at a friend's apartment one night. Beer bottles on the table, music too loud. Someone mentioned an abandoned furniture warehouse a few miles outside town. Said it had been empty forever. Said people avoided it. Said weird things happened there. I laughed louder than everyone else. That should have been my first warning. A few nights later, curiosity won. There were 3 of us, me, Ethan, and Lucas. Names I'll use because they deserve anonymity. We parked near a convenience store down the road and walked the rest of the way. One of us, Ethan, stopped halfway there, suddenly unsure. He said his gut felt wrong. Lucas and I kept going. The building looked dead. Boards over the entrance, ivy clawing up the walls like it was trying to pull the structure back into the ground. No lights, no sound, just the wind whispering through broken concrete. Around back, there it was. A collapsed section of wall, narrow but passable. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. Our phone flashlights cut thin tunnels through the darkness. The main room was enormous, bigger than the warehouse I'd worked security in. Our voices echoed back at us, warped and delayed, like the building was mocking us. Graffiti covered the walls. At first it was meaningless, tags, names, symbols. But as we walked farther, it changed. The messages became sharper, more personal. Kill yourself, tonight. I stopped walking. Further along, the symbols turned violent. Inverted crosses, crude drawings of bodies. Red spray paint smeared like someone had dragged their hand through it. Then we saw the steps, dark stains soaked into the concrete. Old, dry. Too large to ignore. Blood. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We turned away from the steps and headed toward the far side of the room. That's when Lucas's light caught something overhead, hanging from the rafters. A noose. Still intact. Rope stiff with age. Swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. That was enough. We headed back toward the hole in the wall, but outside we noticed another building behind the first. Smaller, squatter. Worse, somehow. Curiosity is a disease. Inside that second structure there was a small room with no doors. Just a window. Inside, hanging from the ceiling, was a massive, inverted cross. Rusted. Heavy. I felt sick. As we turned to leave, Lucas's phone rang. Ethan. Lucas's face drained of color. There's someone else here, he said quietly. Before we could react, headlights flared. A white truck tore around the corner, engines screaming. Another vehicle sat parked near the far side, waiting. We ran. I don't remember how we reached the car. I don't remember unlocking it. Just the sound of tires squealing and my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. We never went back. I tried to forget again. I almost succeeded. Until my mid-20s, when I took a job planning underground events, pop-up parties, warehouses, temporary venues. Money was good. Sleep was optional again. And then there was that building. Another warehouse. Another owner. A man named Caleb. Calm. Too calm. I was setting up alone one afternoon trying to find an electrical panel. Caleb directed me to a narrow stairwell hidden behind an exit door. I had to duck just to fit. The air down there felt wrong. Thick. Pressurized. Dim lights buzzed overhead. I flipped the switches, locked the panel. That's when I heard the buzzing. A red light flashed inside a pitch-black room nearby. Buzz. Silence. Buzz. Silence. Motion triggered, but I wasn't moving. When I stepped closer, the light came on again. And in the corner, someone was sitting there. Long hair, face barely visible. Eyes stretched wide, glistening in the red glow. The mouth curved upward, just slightly. An invitation. Their arm lifted, slowly. Crooked fingers curling toward themselves. Come here, I screamed. I slammed the door and ran. We abandoned the venue, left everything. I never answered Caleb's calls again. Years later, I searched the address. The warehouse never hosted an event. It was never zoned for it. It was never legally rented. And the basement? Official records said it didn't exist. I don't tell this story because I want you to believe in ghosts. I tell it because there are places where bad things happen, and whatever witnesses them doesn't always leave. Sometimes it learns how to hide. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it watches you from behind a stack of boxes, wondering if you'll notice it peeking out one last time.